Hey everyone, Darren here, and today we're going to take a look at the game The Riftbreaker. Now, putting it simply, this game is phenomenal. This is a complete sleeper hit, as far as I'm concerned, and if you're into strategy games, tower defense, or logistics games like Factorio, then you absolutely have to give this a go. Even if you're just broadly into strategy games, this is a great entry point into the sort of base building and logistics genre. It's far more action-orientated than it's about production rates and conveyor belts, but it does gradually introduce you to more of that kind of complexity as you get further into it. So why do I think this game is so good? Well, for one, it's graphically really impressive, especially for a game of this genre. It has full physics-based environments with crazy detailed dynamic lighting and ray tracing too. It's able to handle hundreds if not thousands of enemies at once on screen across vast maps that run parallel to each other. So while you're off in one map, the other map is still consuming and providing resources back to you, which you can then jump back and forth between at any time. And you can do this to tens of maps. There's a fully voiced campaign to take you across the world and give you an aim to work towards. You'll stumble across acidic areas or quicksand, and then you have to kind of develop technologies to be able to build in those places to establish outposts and then feed back those resources. There are 3 massive tech trees, from buildings to weapons to alien creature understanding, with a huge database of life forms with multiple variants that you can study in order to improve your technology and weaponry. None of this feels like arbitrary padding either. A lot of logistics games will just add the blue thing and then you get the green thing to make the red thing, and it just kind of feels like kind of pointless. But here, you've actually got distinct biomes with different enemy types and boss encounters that you need the various technologies to be able to then defeat. You need these things to be able to build and survive in these different biomes, so it really does give you meaning to the different progression within the tech tree. Progression is definitely steady and rewarding. You're constantly getting new things all the time, and it always feels quite meaningful, with a large variety of weaponry that can all be upgraded and modified in various ways, from elemental grenades to machine guns, hammers, spears, and even mech abilities like jumping, dashing, rolling, and that sort of thing can all be unlocked, improved, and then further customized. Now, this is just a phenomenal game, and it has a demo on Steam that you can try, and it's also on Xbox Game Pass for PC. And no, I'm not sponsored, I just think this game is really excellent, and I've got very few complaints or problems with it generally, which is just refreshing. You know, it's similar to how I felt about High Fleet earlier this year. It's just another great indie game that's kind of raised the bar for the genre that it's in. So I've thrown a lot at you there in a very short amount of time, but let's take a little bit of a breather, clear the screen, and dive into the gameplay a little bit more deeply and really break down what works well and what could use some improvements. Now, it's worth noting that the game is not in early access, but the developers have posted a roadmap of features to come, which includes multiplayer later down the line, but it does seem like it's a year away at least. For now, the game is single player only. So, the Riftbreaker has 3 modes of play. The prologue, which is just kind of like a little bit of a tutorial. The campaign, which doesn't have much of a story, but it does have voiced characters that will kind of explain things to you as you discover them, and also certain scenarios and boss fights that are a little bit more scripted. And then there's survival, which is basically a sandbox mode where you can customize its difficulty in a more granular way, like changing the rate of waves, the size of deposits, and the strength of enemies. For the most part, I just stuck with the campaign, and I got about halfway through the tech tree in 15 hours of play. I did actually restart the campaign after about 2 hours, because I just felt like I was learning a few things and I wanted to build a bit more efficiently. It is possible to find yourself in a position where the waves are getting more and more difficult and you have fallen behind, but the game does autosave regularly, so you can always go back and try to learn from your mistakes. I actually recommend as well, if you do play the game, to change your autosave from maybe 5 minutes to 10 minutes, as the game does do a pretty significant stutter when it's doing that saving, and it can be a little annoying every 5 minutes. Anyway, on campaign start, you're kind of beamed into this world, and you basically have nothing but you and your mech. Your mission is to build an interplanetary rift station, of course, but the native wildlife are going to continuously attack you in stronger and stronger waves, so you need to build, defend, research, and work towards powering on that rift station while keeping hordes of enemies at bay. So, you start basic with the 2 core resources in the game, carbonium and ironium. Now, why not just call it carbon and iron? Because sci-fi, I guess? Space? I mean, these elements exist out there, and this is set in the Milky Way galaxy, so
But you're right.
Sure. Now, there's a lot more resources in the game. There's titanium, uranium, palladium. Pretty much all the biomes are in there and used for all sorts of specialized upgrades. But the foundation of your economy always boils down to carbon and iron. Those are the two that kind of stay on your screen the whole time because there's a push and pull of those resources that are used in practically every building. Carbon's mostly used to build things, and iron is then often used to make like ammunition and stuff. To gather these, you're going to have to place down mines on deposits and then manage their power by building solar and wind farms. And batteries are then going to kind of store that power during the night when solar isn't as strong. Now, this is all fairly standard stuff for this type of game, but where it starts to get a little bit more interesting is that weather can actually change really dramatically and fairly quickly. You can get dense fog rolling in, rain, storms, even tornadoes, and these of course can either boost wind and solar or they could just reduce it. So you're going to have to manage your reserves carefully because your towers and all your defenses are going to be powered by the same power network typically. So everything can quickly shut down if you have a bad string of luck. And this leads me to the biggest divergence for a game like this, and that is that there is no transportation in the game. There's no conveyor belts and no transportation systems to kind of move goods around maps. Instead, all the resources in Riftbreaker are deposited into a global inventory instantly. Portal technology is readily available in this world, I guess, and it's free. You can build portals to teleport around the map instantly, and when you're making ammo for your guns in a factory, it just gets teleported back to your suit in batches every minute or so. So straight away, a huge part of logistics games has just been cut out. And that's because the game is much more action orientated. You spend a lot of your time out exploring and fighting, and the factory is more just a means to providing you with upgrades to make you more powerful, as well as completing the global objective of building that rift station. But I know what you might be thinking, the game doesn't necessarily skimp out on the complexity. Later on, you're going to be managing liquids, which are globally stored, but they do have to be transported in pipes into the buildings to actually be used. Then you're going to be getting into the weeds of production rates and conversions when you're turning sludge into water and gas, and then you're burning the gas and you're storing the water. You want to get bigger energy yields and bigger power plants, that sort of thing. The complexity is there. Maybe not on the level of Factorio, but you will have a lot to manage and think about. And for first timers to this type of game, it'll definitely still overwhelm you. Now, as you're building up your technology in various research stations, you'll start needing more rare resources to progress further, and this will require you to set up an orbital scanner, and this allows you to then jump across the planet to various biomes to find these different materials. Your global objectives are also tracked here, so you can see what you need to get and where you need to go to get it, and you can also choose to do this at any time and leave and come back as many times as you want. You'll often go to an area and realize, oh, I don't have the technology to deal with maybe extremely high temperatures or whatever, so you have to hop back out, get that back at your headquarters, and then revisit it at a later stage. The maps are randomly generated, but if you set up an outpost building, it'll actually save the map for you and you can then visit it repeatedly. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, while you're in one map, the other maps are running in the background. Your technology is still progressing, and you're still earning resources based on your production chains that you left in the other maps. Now remember, your inventory is global. I mean truly global, not just, in one map, but it's across the entire planet. So when you arrive in a new map, you have all your materials already with you. But if resources run out, you'll feel that everywhere, and resources are finite, so you will run out, and you'll have to revisit a place to find more deposits, find more stuff, and, expand the factory. Now, the good news about this is that, as far as I'm aware, you can only be attacked in a location where you currently are. It's not like you're dashing all over the place to fight off different waves across like 10 different maps or anything. It's just where you are is when you get attacked. Because the game is a lot more action-orientated, you typically set up a factory, get your production going, queue up technologies, and then venture out looking for alien nests, unique items, and rare deposits. The campaign as well will have various missions for you, like asking you to set up radars to triangulate some position of something, study some wildlife to learn how they cope in a certain biome, and then protect research stations for a certain amount of time to get the job done, whatever it may be. Doing all of these types of things gives you some sort of new resource that you can harvest and find out in the world, as well as different technologies to then better deal with these biomes in the future. Heat protection, stabilized floors for the quicksand, acid protection, that sort of thing. Now, as you get these technologies, you can then also build weaponry to deal with tougher enemies. For the longest time, my base was being harassed by big stone-looking golems that resisted most kinetic attacks that I threw at it. But eventually, after a visit to the acid swamps, I was able to then melt them more effectively, and also researched rocket technology which then could kind of blast them apart. I also developed a chilling spear that could then strike at a distance and it would slow them to a crawl. So let's get into the weapons and enemy variety. In Riftbreaker, your mech has 2 arms, each of which can hold 3 weapons, and you have a variety of melee weapons such as a sword, a spear, a hammer, power fists, and that kind of thing, as well as very large variety of, well, everything, I guess. I mean, lasers, flamethrowers, acid spewers, kinetic machine guns, snipers, shotguns, rocket launchers, swarm missiles, grenade launchers, nukes, the list goes on, and it does go on. I haven't gotten absolutely everything yet, but you can see them in the tech tree. Now these weapons can be upgraded to allow you to use mod slots, and mods can then be placed into these weapons to give them different elemental effects or increases to their damage or their rate of fire. The guns then also, gameplay-wise, play a little bit differently. Some of them are on a wind-up and then release sort of method, or just a traditional, like, right-click, hold to fire. And you control both weapons at the same time on both sides of the mouse. I played mostly keyboard and mouse, so left-click will control your left arm, right-click, right arm. You get the idea. On top of that, you've also got consumables like grenades, mines, and abilities like repairs and radar pings. You then also have one mech action that you can use, be it a dash, a roll, a jump, things like that. There can also then be customized so that your dash will leave a wake of fire behind it or frost. You get the idea. There's also slots to apply more armor and other unique upgrades and skins for your mech as well. Almost all of these weapons translate into the defensive towers that you can build, ranging from artillery towers to turrets to flame towers and so on. You can even place mods into the towers to then make them elemental or to increase their output or whatever it might be. All of this variety would be fairly trivial without matching enemy variety, and there is loads. There's a database of aggressive enemies with 23 entries in it. Now, 23 on its own, not a massive number, but they do come in different combinations with different varieties based on the biome that you're in, with varying elemental resistances and abilities. So you'll largely get used to about 23 or so behaviors of enemies, but then you'll have to think a little bit more on top of that with regards to the biome that you're in and how to defeat them. Now you've got swarms, groups, or single enemies that can all charge at you and do different things. They can be mid-sized, big, or really small. They can then attack at close range, mid-range, or some of them are basically lobbing artillery at you. And then they also specialize in an element or type of damage, and they can resist other types. There's also then the special types, such as enemies that will use stealth, a cloaking device, and kind of appear in front of you. Or there's some that live in muddy terrain, burrowing underground if you get close. Or some that release flying creatures from their pods, and you need to kill them to take the flying creatures down. Then there's variants on all of these based on the biome you're in, like I said, and then there's also large boss fights. So variety is crazy. It has to be one of the reasons I think this game is so great, because there's so much visual and gameplay variety. I've been encountering new enemies constantly, and there's still 4 types I actually haven't even seen yet, and apparently 3 special types too. So that is basically Riftbreaker in summary. It's excellent. For me, it's running great. It has controller support too, which I'd actually recommend because it is sort of like a twin stick shooter. It just makes for the building can be a bit more complicated that way. For the most part, I played with a mouse and keyboard without any issue, really. I did say at the beginning that the game isn't without its flaws, and for me at least, it's the UI and the in-game camera. So starting with the UI, there's no scaling. I'm not sure how this game will work on an ultra-wide monitor, but I don't see really an option for that. But just for me, with a regular 16:9 monitor, the UI just felt a little bit too big. When you're being attacked from the bottom of your screen, the radar is kind of blocking what's coming towards you. Now, it'd be nice if it just went transparent when you aimed over it, or if you could toggle it on and off with a hotkey. I also just found it a bit confusing what resources I actually had in total. There was a little bit of confusion on my part over what buildings are consuming what, and to keep me from basically boring you and getting into semantics, this could just be solved with a simple statistics screen. A list of all the buildings that are consuming something would be very helpful, because you can actually have buildings in different maps that you made hours ago consuming something, and then you're like, oh yeah, I need to go find that to turn it off because maybe you're running a deficit if you run into a bit of a problem. It'd just be a nice quality of life feature. You sort of have it with the orbital page. You can see things if you hop around, but it's not all condensed into one. Lastly, your build menu is really tedious to navigate. This feels like this one is better on a controller rather than it is navigating with a mouse. And that's because there's only 5 categories for all the buildings, and there's no subcategories, so you have to start scrolling through a list of things to see what you can actually build. A lot of them look really similar from their icons, so it'd just be much better if things were grouped. For instance, in defense, I have walls, gates, towers, portals, radar, and repair stations. That's, everything I have right now in defense. Making a subgroup for everything to do with walls, everything to do with towers, and everything else would probably make things, finding things much easier. You wouldn't have to scroll through anything. Also, putting the icon of the resource generated on the icon for the building would then just make it much more recognizable at a glance. It's like, oh yeah, this building makes carbonium, because I can see the carbonium icon right there. Now, these are like minor gripes. It's really not that big of a deal. I think the UI is probably the weakest point of the game. Its quality just doesn't feel like it matches the quality of the rest of the game. It is decent though. The radar in particular is very useful, and the resource float in the top right is great too. I'm almost nitpicking, I suppose. So that's kind of it for my video on Riftbreaker. A very pleasant surprise for me. I'm looking forward to seeing the various updates planned too. A world editor, mod support, and more planned for December, and then DLC and updates is planned for the first half of 2022. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that for sure. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments below, and if you'd like to see further updates from me on this game in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.